Have a seat on your porcelain throne. It's time to talk some shit on the Powell movement.
Welcome to the Powell movement. I'm your host, Mike Powell, and this week I find myself in a mad scramble to get podcasts recorded and ready to go, so there's going to be no long intro for me. Basically, I returned home from the Payne McSlonky event to a week chock full of research and recovery, and that was 2 weeks ago. So this week I've been busy recording 3 different podcasts, and I need to get one of them edited in the next 2 days, and that's going to be a big challenge because I want to head up to the summit at Snoqualmie this weekend for 2 of my last days of shredding. And while I said it's going to be a challenge that I'll overcome as I don't miss episodes. You know this, so it will go up on time. I'll just be working really late on Saturday and Sunday night, but that's part of the game. And skiing this weekend isn't the only thing I have to look forward to. On Tuesday, if everything goes as planned health-wise with my wife, and that's a big maybe right now as she's just out of chemo and feeling terrible, but if she feels better by Tuesday, we're heading to Las Vegas to blow a 13-year-old's mind. For this trip, I connected with former Powell Movement guest Marco DeSanti, and he's going to give us a behind-the-scenes tour of the Beatles' Love Show, and he hooked us up with tickets to see the Michael Jackson show. We are pumped. The only negative thing about this trip is that we are going to spend way too much time in Vegas. It's like 5 days there, and if you've been to Vegas before, well, you know that's a lot of time there. But it's okay. It's going to be 90 degrees in Vegas, and it's going to be rainy and 60 in Seattle. So we are psyched for this spring break. What I'm also psyched for is my interview this week. I've always heard so many great things about Chris Rubens, but I've never met the dude before. But once we started chatting on the podcast, he seemed more like an old friend than a complete stranger to me. It was a really cool vibe that we had right off the bat, and I can't wait to actually meet the guy one day. And his story is another good one. It's really weird how all these people have a very similar path in life in terms of skiing, but everybody's story is so different. That's what makes all these podcasts so interesting to me. Before I get into it, I want to ask you to tell a friend about the show. Good podcasts are hard to find, so you sharing really helps the show grow. So does rating and reviewing me wherever you listen. And if I read your review in my outro of the podcast, you're going to win a limited edition Powell Movement Puffin, which is pretty much like the coolest, cutest koozie you've ever had in your entire life. Finally, I only work with the best brands in the business, and I hope that you'll visit their websites and buy their products. Those brands are Rollerblade, Elan Skis, Peter Glenn Ski and Sports, Best Day Brewing, and Stanley. Now, it's time to talk with Chris Rubens. Well, I'll just jump right into it, and I like to talk about money on my podcast, and while we'll get to actual dollars later on in the show, when I think of you and your ski career, it makes me want to compare your ski career to a person who's similar to yourself. And I thought about Cody Townsend. He's got a career that's pretty similar to yours. Would you say that's kind of accurate?
Oh, good old Captain America. Yeah, I've known Cody forever, and back in the day, ski racing, there's a bunch of start lists that we found that have our names together. So yeah, I think for sure that we've had very paralleled careers and definitely shared the same sponsor for a long time too. So I think that kind of goes hand in hand.
So the big difference between you and Cody is that he's American and you're Canadian. And from what I've seen in the ski industry, unless you're Sean Pettit, Canadians often end up making a lot less than their American counterparts. And they're promoted a lot less, and just a lot less things happen because they're Canadian. Is that something that's real, or is that just me being dumb and making shit up?
I mean, it's funny, and Cody's brought this up very often, is like we so rarely share how much we make as athletes, you know?
Yeah.
And people like really like to keep us in the dark, but certainly I think it seems like the American counterparts make a lot more money than we do. I mean, to be fair, especially as of recently with the 50 project, I think he deserves all that money. And, you know, like the Canadians, we've always kind of just been happy to go skiing and kind of can't believe that we're actually getting to do this.
So is it more you're happy to be here and you're not actually pushing for the 50 project dollars and things like that? You're just kind of taking what your sponsors are getting, and Cody's more motivated in creating projects ahead of time? Because I did some research on you, and it does seem like you're more fly by the seat of your pants, let things come to you a little bit.
Yeah, I think that for sure. You know, I mean, I've definitely come from a place where I never really believed that I'd be living this kind of lifestyle. And I feel like I still do pinch myself every day and like kind of can't believe that I've had a career this long and doing it. And I feel like I grew up with a lot of skiers in Canada that it really was a passion. And when a company was like, hey kid, here's a free pair of skis. They were just like blown away. And every step along the way was kind of just like in disbelief. And then we're definitely, I would say business hasn't been our strong point, but we've learned it over the years. It's been kind of like a budding thing for us is getting better at the business side of things and learning to promote yourself. And, a lot of the things that don't get taught.
Yeah, and they're all things that help build and create a foundation for a great career. And it sounds like you're getting into some of it a little bit late, but you've had all the trips and all the experiences of an incredible high-end pro skier. So that's amazing. It might not be the business end that you wanted early on, but I'm sure you're figuring that out now. But before we can even talk about your ski career, we have to get to the unique path that you took to get here. And most people come on the show and they get into skiing because their parents have a history with skiing and they love it. But your folks, they're both British. Do they have any ski background whatsoever?
No. I mean, my parents are British, and so they love the mountains, and they did ski, but it was on dry slopes a little bit. But when they had my sister and I, we were actually living in Australia. My dad is a oil geophysicist, so he did a lot of traveling around the world and got this opportunity to come to Calgary, and it was something that they'd always wanted to do, was live near the mountains. And I'd have to ask them, but kind of my take on it, is we moved to Calgary. I was 5.5, and they found this thing called Nancy Green, which is the start of ski racing. And they're like, oh, so you take our kids for the weekend and we can go skiing? This sounds great. Like,
Right.
This is like cheap babysitting. They had no idea what they were getting themselves into. Fast forward 10, 15 years, and I'm a glorified ski bum, and my sister's a World Cup ski racer. So, yeah, things really spiraled. I mean, I really would wonder if they could do it all again, if they would do it. But, I mean, they're all pretty happy about it now.
Well, you've got to think that you've been a pro skier for like 2 decades. Your sister's a 2-time Olympian. And I'm guessing your folks have to have some kind of athletic ability. Like, what sports were they good at?
You know what? They just love the outdoors. I think that's something that really resonates with me is like we lived in Calgary, which is the city, but I don't really remember spending a lot of time there. Every time we could possibly get away, we were out camping. My dad's a huge mountain biker. They love hiking. It really didn't matter what they did as long as they were outside. That was kind of their happy place. And they certainly like put that path forward for me of just loving nature and being outside and connecting with it all.
I think of you now talking about your upbringing, being in nature and connecting with it all. Now you're this ultra environmentalist, but your dad was in the oil business, you said. And what did he do in the oil business? Because when I think about the oil business, I think about money and I think about ruining the planet. And what was his role in that whole world?
Yeah, I mean, it's super interesting. My whole upbringing, like I said, it was very about being in the environment and being close and learning to tread lightly. Like my parents, they never bought excessive things. They were super careful about the environment. But then, like kind of learning later in life more about all these things. So my dad was an oil geophysicist. So basically they shoot beams into the earth, like seismic, and then he interprets the data and tells oil companies where to drill. So I definitely, like as I started getting more down the climate change things, had some pretty heated discussions with him. But also I really respect my dad because he comes from a science background and we could have these like really interesting discussions. And I learned a lot, I learned a lot of things about oil, about fracking, all these things coming out of his mouth. So it was super interesting. And being able to have like really difficult discussions with him, I found very important in learning and just learning how to present myself in the real world.
Yeah, I guess it makes you be able to look at both sides from someone that you trust and respect. So you can learn the side of the profit of oil from someone who's in the business. And then you're doing all the stuff that you're doing on your end and with POW. So you can learn both point and counterpoint, but it's like the juxtaposition of your life is like the oil baron on one side, although he's a scientist. I just want to call him an oil baron. And then the activists on the other side. But back to Nancy Green, you get put into racing. And do you become super passionate about racing, or was it just the only program that you were put in and you just had to deal with it because your parents were out shredding?
So we grew up with the Sunshine Ski Club, and it was like not a super serious ski club. Like I remember when I was younger, we free skied so much that you were excited to get into gates. We did a lot of free skiing. They didn't make snow up there at the time. And yeah, we just skied around the mountains. And for me, as long as I can remember, I was like instantly hooked on skiing. I was completely obsessed. That's like all I wanted to do. I don't feel like I had hopes and dreams. I just loved the sport. This was kind of part of me really early on, and had a really good group of kids in there that, we'd go skiing all the time after the program was done. And yeah, it was a pretty cool upbringing. And then I feel like ski racing was just kind of like part of it. And as soon as I kind of got shown a different way, that was kind of the end of that sport for me pretty quick.
Well, when you think about being in ski racing, I think you're in the same program as the Hjorleifson family. It's Eric and Steve. Eric's like 5 years older, so I'm thinking you're closer with Steve at first. But do you become friends with those guys like right when you get to Sunshine?
Yeah, so they were actually with the Norquay Club, but there were so many ski races that we grew up together ski racing. I mean, my first like memory is Eric not ski racing, but at a ski race and airing off a cat track into the moguls. So they have this like totally etched in my brain, and it was actually the Western Canadians, and I think that was probably the last time I beat them at anything. But that was the thing. I kind of gravitated to those guys pretty quick. They weren't taking things super serious. They were really good skiers, but they were always the skiers that when the race was done and we had like free time, like, let's go skiing. And that's kind of how I ended up with those guys.
And Eric was like a badass ski racer. I mean, given he was older than you, but I think he made the national team. And did he kind of give you and everybody else the idea that they could go far in racing, or did you not even care and it just happened?
No, I mean, Eric, he definitely, for me anyways, he led the way into free skiing.
Yep.
For me, it was just like this natural progression of like, I was done with racing. And luckily we had this program called the Rocky Mountain Freeriders, who Eric was coaching. It was started by Guy Mowbray and Kevin Yurtis. And as soon as ski racing was done, it was like the obvious transition. His brother Steve and I went into that program together the first year. And it was just this like very obvious transition into free skiing. And at the meantime, like Eric was like really trying to be a professional free skier. He was going to all the jib competitions back in the day, trying to get in X Games. And we were kind of like looking from afar, like, holy cow. And then all of a sudden he got his big break into Matchstick. And I mean, that was the start of it all. And I think for me, I was like, oh, we're just these kids from the Bow Valley. Like, we can't be those guys. And all of a sudden you're like seeing one of your good friends in the biggest ski movie in the industry. And you're just like, holy cow, like he is that guy all of a sudden.
Yeah, he made it.
Yeah. And I think it made a lot of us realize that it was possible, and it was a really big deal. And then he fostered definitely myself coming up and really helped me out a lot.
And I'm going to jump backwards a little bit because you race till you're 16 and then you don't move up to the provincial team. And I think you have to get named to that by province that you're in to be able to continue on in ski racing. And I'm guessing that's not a huge bummer because you've seen what Eric's doing and you're going to kind of gravitate towards his end of the spectrum. But on the other side of things, your sister is just destroying it with ski racing. I mean, she eventually goes on to the national team. She goes to the Olympics a couple times. Was there ever any jealousy of what your sister was doing in ski racing? Or was it just all support and love and you realized that you were going in a different direction?
No, all support and love. I mean, for me, I think it kind of explains well is like, I was the guy that did quite well in training. I'd be beating like the top guys, and then all of a sudden it come to race day and they would have the run of their lives and I would just like totally burn. My sister was the opposite. She would kind of like not be doing super good in training, and then race day comes along and she would just nail it. So it was a pretty obvious decision for me. Like, I wasn't going to be like this amazing ski racer, but it was pretty amazing to see where she took that and go into the Olympics, and got a chance to watch her in Vancouver. And it was one of the crazier things I've ever seen in my life, for sure. You're sitting at the bottom, like, you kind of can't believe that your sibling's doing something like that.
I can imagine hearing her name over the microphone. It's like just hair raising for you. Like, I can't believe it.
Yeah. And I can't remember if it was the Super G or the downhill, but it was like all the girls were crashing in front of her. And so it was like pretty tense to begin with. And I mean, the interesting thing for what I do is like, by the time my mom or dad have seen it, it's like they know I'm alive. They know I'm okay because we've shot it already. Whereas this is like watching it in real time. And yeah, I was trying to hold a camera and it was shaking. And I definitely remember all those feelings for sure. It was super intense.
And then just thinking about who you were, because I think like high school tells a lot about who a person is and is going to be. Like, what group did you fit into? Did you play any sports, or was it all just about skiing? And what kind of shit were you into?
I ended up at the sports school for ski racing, and it was definitely like very much all about ski racing.
So you were on a program with rules and regulations, and like skiing was life racing wise until you could go free ski when it was over.
Yeah, totally. But then in the summers when I had a bit more free time, I had a bunch of semi-delinquent friends and we went skateboarding all summer. So I was always in touch with this. I mean, I just had a son, so I was talking about this just last night. It's like, if I didn't have ski racing, I don't know where I'd be. Just like the amount of energy output that you have for that sport, like at the end there, I was like working out 3 times a day, like super intense. But if I had that energy not going somewhere, I don't know where I'd be. Like school was definitely not my thing. And that actually had a big part of why I ended up quitting ski racing. I could have like protested and done all the things, but I was in grade 11. If I kept ski racing, it would take me 2 years to finish my high school. And I was just like, I hated high school. I wanted to be out. I was like, okay, just focus for 1 year, get good grades, and then be done with this. And I'm like super stoked that I did that. I can still remember leaving high school on my last exam and being like, I'm never coming back here again. Like, I'm done with this.
So you graduate, you head to Canmore, and that's when you join the RMF team. And that program, is Eric your coach? Because when I think of Eric, and I've only met him a couple of different times at a couple of different events, and he seemed like he was a dude who was taking everything in, just kind of listening, taking everything in, not talking too much by any means. But then when he had something to say, he'd drop it. Everybody would listen. And it was like, oh, Eric's dropping some gospel right now. And that's pretty interesting. Yeah, good idea. But as a coach, is he able to break down shit and actually talk to you guys and coach you? Or is he more leading by example and just like throwing a 7 and like, hey, just do that?
Yeah, I mean, I think there was like a really nice balance of both in the RMF, but all the coaches like Eric and Kevin and Guy were like super good skiers. And I coached for years after that. And I like really took along that in stride of the fact that like as a kid, you're like in school from Monday to Friday, everyone's telling you what to do. It's like the last thing you want to do on the weekends is get told like totally what to do. So it was very much like, we'd do like shred or die and you'd like have to keep up to the coaches and stuff like that. It was very much just like an environment where you wanted to push yourself and emulate the people around you. But that being said, we build jumps, and I remember Eric helping us out a ton with the aerial stuff that we had no idea what to do with. So there was definitely like a good balance, I would say.
Okay. And you eventually become a coach at RMF, like you said, and you've got this front row seat to see Eric's career blowing up at that time. And it's got to be pretty exciting. When does the idea first creep into your head that you're good enough to maybe get sponsored and maybe a pro ski thing is something that could happen if you work hard? When does that pop into your head?
I mean, I don't know if it still's popped into my head, like, I mean, it has obviously, but you more just like pursue these opportunities and you're open to the idea and working hard is like more how I see it. I think as with anything, like we're all our worst critics, especially with like so many people in the industry around. You're like, oh, am I good enough to do this? I don't know. So yeah, I don't know like if it ever totally popped. It was just like these opportunities, and I've always been like a big opportunity guy that has a hard time saying no when those come my way. And I think there's also a lot of luck involved. Like if you go back to the Cody Townsend thing, like his first chance with Matchstick didn't go super well, and he took a couple years to get back on the program, and then all of a sudden it worked out super good for him. Yeah, so I think there's like a huge amount that people don't see behind the scenes of like how hard you're working at these things. And then, you go on your one trip with a film company and you get crappy snow conditions. It's like, it might not work out. And that was your chance. And you might not get another chance for a couple of years.
Well, you say all this, and kind of looking at your whole career, it seems like a lot of things have come your way. It's amazing how a lot of these things have come your way. But the first thing that happened was you going to get something, it seemed like, because it sounds like you went and peddled yourself to the guys at Fresh Sports. Like you went into Calgary, there's this new shop that's kind of different than the rest of the old school ski shops. And you kind of pitched yourself like, hey guys, this is what I'm doing. This is me. Can I get some support or can I get anything? And they bid on it. Is that kind of how the first thing happened for you?
Oh, 100%. Yeah. So, I mean, it was pretty cool where we grew up. We had like the Rocky Mountain Freeriders, which was definitely like the first free ride program at the time. And then Fresh Sports came along, which was definitely the first like more free skis store.
Like 2003, they come out.
Yeah, exactly. And so, I was like a young green kid out of ski racing because, we got support ski racing with the company. So I knew a bit about sponsorship and all that. walked in and was like, hey guys, like, want to sponsor me? And they're like, yeah, for sure. Like, just like send in a resume and blah, blah, blah. And then it just so happened the next week we were out with the Rocky Mountain Freeriders and built a big jump up on Brown Shirt and was out with a bunch of the employees. And they're like, oh yeah, we got to get this kid sponsored. And yeah, Steve Sanchuk from Fresh has been a huge help over the years of just kind of like, I know he's helped Eric a lot too, just kind of helping us navigate business. And then for me, he hooked me up with at the time he hooked me up with Solomon and Smith, which for the first 10 years were my sponsors. And then Solomon was 19 years. So yeah, it was a huge help, like a kickstart into the whole world of it.
It's time for my first sponsor break, and I'm stoked that Rollerblade is back as a sponsor. I have a long history with inline skates, and out of all the skates I've tried, nothing compares to the quality and support of a Rollerblade inline skate. And the reason I feel this way is because of the support the skates offer. Whether you're skating one of their hard boot models that offers maximum support, or one of their soft boot models that offer support where you need it, you're going to find that Rollerblade branded skates don't get soft and overflex like the competition. And that's something that you can see and feel while you're skating. This is the brand that invented the sport, and the products they make are second to none. Ski season may be coming to an end, but that's no excuse to get out of ski shape. Inline skating is the only sport that will keep you there, and it doesn't matter how much you ride your $10,000 bike or how much you run, nothing gets or keeps you in ski shape like inline skating. And the best way to do that is to pick up a pair of Rollerblade inline skates and download the Rollerblade Ski to Skate app, which has a training program that'll keep you at your best. You can find out about all things Rollerblade and their app over at rollerblade.com. Next up, it's a place that you can get your Rollerblade branded inline skates and your Elan Skis. I'm talking about Peter Glenn Ski and Sports. The best online shopping experience in snow, in my opinion. Why are they so great? Because Peter Glenn does it all. Online, they have the best deals on the internet, and they offer free shipping on orders over $50, a no-hassle return policy that makes things easy to send back if you have to, and that's really important to me. You don't want to be hassled when you're returning a product. And what separates Peter Glenn from those internet-driven companies looking for the biggest profits is that Peter Glenn is really a mom-and-pop retail establishment, and they've been getting people out on snow for over 65 years. And when you're in their stores, you're going to find all the brands, all the products, and a lot of passionate, knowledgeable people who want to help get you dialed in for your next adventure. On top of that, Peter Glenn's going to price match. If you find what you want at another reputable website or store for a lower price, let the good folks know at Peter Glenn and they're going to match that price. So please do that for me, and before you look elsewhere to outfit your adventure, head on over to peterglenn.com. My final sponsor this round is Elan Skis. And if you haven't noticed, Elan is building a cult following here in the States on the basis of their Ripstick line. I personally ski on the Ripsticks 96 Black Edition and the Ripsticks 106, and I will tell you that I noticed a difference in my skiing on day one. It's amazing how light and playful these skis can be while also remaining rock solid in the turn and at high speeds. It's the quality that I've come to expect from skis built in the Slovenian Alps. But what really separates Elan from its competition is their factory. They built a solar power plant on top of their state-of-the-art building, and this, combined with independence from fossil fuels, will provide a carbon sink as powerful as 15,000 trees on an annual basis. While a lot of brands are saying they are making a difference when it comes to the environment, Elan is really putting their money where their mouth is. To find out more about all things Elan, head on over to elanskis.com. And when he makes that call to Solomon and you get your first free pair of skis or you get your first free anything, are you just shitting your pants? Because it's one thing to get it in ski racing because you're going to school and you're training for this and you're working out 3 times a day. And yeah, you want to see some results and see some people supporting you because you're doing pretty well. But in this freeride world where there is no set path to becoming famous, you have to be Hjorleifson or someone like that to make something happen, or it seems like that early on. Are you just shitting your pants when you get your first package or your first anything?
Yeah, just like super stoked and like honored. And then it was like very much right place, right time. There was Kevin Yurtis and Colin Puskas were kind of older freeriders in the area, and they were kind of like getting to like not the height of their career, but starting to like get magazine articles and like film things. And then they would just like drag us along, which was the huge help. You start getting your name out. It was so much just, had a photographer, Ryan Curry at the time, went out with him like whenever. There was no like shooting articles or anything like that. We were just going shooting, and it just seemed very natural to like, okay, let's be productive. And that's kind of how it went for like really my whole career, but definitely like at the start there, it was like just try to be productive. And, you know, one year would lead to the next, and it would be like a little bit more and be like, okay, here's some money. Okay, here's like some money to go on a trip. That snowball effect like really was a huge deal for me. And definitely at the time with Solomon, it was like they didn't ask for much.
It was pre-social media, right? They just wanted you skiing every day, and you're shooting with a photographer. Hopefully that photographer is going to submit photos and get you published.
Yeah, exactly. And they really like, I felt like, and I saw it throughout my career, is like they would give you the money with like no real things attached to it, but there was expectations that you were going to be productive with that money. And so if you were productive, you got it back and maybe a little bit more. And so that kind of was the story of my career for a long time.
I would say that you were very smart and productive compared to a lot of other people when you look at just like the digital assets you were creating early on, because you had a blog in like 2005, 2006, before anybody was doing it. You laugh, but your stories were like 3 pages long, chock full of pictures. And I'm sure thousands of people were checking that out. And that's a sales driver, whether you want to believe it or not. When people are just reading about a Solomon trip because they're looking for any ski content they can get, and you're one of the few pro skiers putting that shit out there, the brand recognizes it. And it's another reason every year when it's contract time to be like, yeah, dude, he's doing something.
Yeah, I mean, I've always been really attracted to the story side of skiing. I enjoy the progression side. I wouldn't say I've ever been like totally at the leading edge of progression like a Hjorleifson or Sage or something like that, but I've just like really enjoyed the story side. I enjoy the people that you meet. I enjoy the experiences. It's such a unique industry in that, you know? Like I was just traveling and some guy's like, oh, like, what are you doing? You're like, oh, I'm just over here for work. And he's like, but you got your skis. I'm like, well, yeah, it's ski work. And, you know, go on to like explain a little bit about it. And he's like, man, I work for a software company. Like we don't ever get to do fun things like that. And you're like, that's kind of the ski industry in a nutshell. Like it is a fun place to be. And there's like insane characters.
But you'll never make software money.
You will never make software money. But that's the beauty of it, is that people are here for the lifestyle.
Yes, for sure.
It's not all about the money. I mean, of course, it's an essential part and you have to figure that side of it out. But the lifestyle, I think, trumps the money. And that's what keeps us here and keeps us doing it.
That's why ski bums exist, because the money isn't what it's about. It's about the feeling. It's about being able to ski every day. We were talking about how you love telling stories, but in the beginning, there was also contests in your world as well. And when you're on the Fresh program early on, the first one that really stood out was a contest in Fernie. Do you remember the one I'm talking about, and how'd that go?
I don't know if I remember the one that you're talking about, to be honest. But I mean, that was like part of it back then, you know, you did contests. And truth be told, I hated the contests. I mean, they were like kind of like part of it, but you know, like you just get yourself so stressed out. And especially if you are a sponsored skier there, I personally felt like more pressure on there to like prove your worth or whatever. But yeah, I was immediately drawn more to the creative, like filming side of it. And that's definitely where I still like, I firmly love the filming photo aspect of skiing.
Well, we're going to get to photos and filming and all that stuff. But early on, it seems like you did some of those things. And was there a highlight in any of the contests that you did?
I would say the one that is like kind of stuck in my brain was, I think it was the Canadian Free Ski Championships at Red Mountain, and did it a couple years. And then pretty sure it was the last year that I was there. The first face is on the link face just under the chair. And it was actually Hoji and I inspecting. And there's some guys going up the chair with beers like at like 9 a.m. and they're like, hit the air in between the trees. And we're like, what air? And you like can't see it. And then finally find this sneaky air through the trees. And we're like, oh, this thing's sick. I actually had a good landing and all that. And so that was like the qualifier day. And I went on to win with that line. So I was in first going into the big day on Mount Roberts there. And definitely didn't have like a whole lot of experience at the time, just like in the big mountains, or I think I probably thought I had more experience than I did. And I remember just getting absolutely schooled on the Roberts face. It was so long. My legs were burning. I like didn't pick my line out properly. And I just remember like going, you know, the classic like of skiing, going from the highest of highs to the lowest of lows, you know, in 2 days. But it was definitely like a really good learning experience for me of being like, oh, okay, you have a lot to learn here.
Did you ever do any of the Freeride World Tour type contests where you're traveling halfway across the world, spending every single penny that you possibly have, only to show up and just see sharks hidden everywhere and a not safe course, only to sit there, have to pay like 5 extra days for a hotel room because of the contest, the window's extended, and then like you ski the worst run of your life? Did you do that kind of shit too?
You're really selling it there. I was fortunate enough not to do any of that. Yeah, I was like not a competitor. It was never my thing. And I was pretty fortunate enough to get into like the matchstick realm pretty early on. Like we were relatively early on and rode that train for many years.
Yeah, and we're going to talk about that, but I'm going to jump into sponsors because I kind of jump all over the place and it'll all work itself out at the end. So you said Fresh Sports had hooked you up with Solomon and Smith, and let's just flow at first, and then it eventually turns into money and travel and stuff like that, I would think. One thing that I find interesting is eventually I believe you go head to toe with Solomon. So that's like one check for outerwear, skis, boots, goggles, poles, helmets, maybe sneakers, who knows? Is an athlete better off going all in with one brand, going head to toe, or would you have made more money if you were going with, a goggle company, a helmet company, a outerwear company, a ski company, a pole company? Where do you feel it's a better choice for an athlete to do? Because I know money's not the most important thing, but if you're going to call skiing work, you have to get paid, and I'm just wondering what the best way to get paid is.
That is it's such a tough question. I think with anything, there's pros and cons. The obvious con with going all in on a company is all your eggs are in one basket.
So they need to invest in you. You're with Solomon. All your eggs are in one basket for 19 years or 10 years or however long it is. You're with them for 19 years. Do they invest in 2, 3, 4-year contracts with you, or do they make you beg for money every year?
No, I mean, we're on 2, 3-year contracts is kind of how it worked.
Well, that's great.
Which was great. So I was on skis and apparel since the beginning. And then what they did was brought me on to like goggles and helmets. And at the time, the big push, like the real big push was Solomon TV. And then as like they had these emerge, like the goggles and helmets were new. And so like whenever they wanted the catalog or any like advertisements, they wanted a head to toe athlete. So the finance side was great, but it also like the exposure was a big deal. You know, like some of the trips, like if you weren't head to toe, they didn't put you on there. And so that was kind of like a big deal at the time. I've recently switched. And so like after 19 years, I'm on a different apparel company and different ski company. And it's super interesting, you know, having everything all in house. You're only talking to like one group. And like if you're pitching an idea, you're talking to one person. Now you're like talking to 2 different people, 2 different companies. So it definitely adds some complexity having 2 different things. But then at the same time, if you have like a story idea, one company might be super into it and it like fits in their brand image for that year or whatever, and it doesn't fit with the other company. So yeah, I don't know. I feel like there's pros and cons. There's no like right or wrong here.
Okay. And then if you think about your finances as a pro skier, have you ever had a year where you haven't had to work manual labor in the summers or done something in the summer to be able to just be a pro skier and not have to work at all?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I guess a lot of it is like what you consider a lot of money. You know, as you get older, what you used to consider a lot of money turns out it's not that much money. You know, there's so many pro skiers out there that have other jobs. I think part of the reason is finance. I think part of the reason is that you do have a lot of time off in the summer, and inevitably, if you're like a go-getter type person, you end up in some sort of business. And if you've been doing it for a long time, you've learned how to do business. You've learned how to do marketing. And so these new business ideas, like all of a sudden are like really exciting for you. So it's just presenting itself. It's also a lot of looking forward, having a plan B if it doesn't work out. Like I think there's a lot of skiers out there, pro skiers, that are like ready for it to end at any given moment. You know, like you get in a different team manager and all of a sudden you don't see eye to eye, or the brand decides to shut down. You know, we've seen that over the years. So it never feels like you have this crazy job security. So it keeps you on your toes and makes you like perform the best and be valuable, and then have kind of those plan Bs, I think.
And I guess you've got to realize that anything can happen at any time, even if it's unexpected. Like you're on Solomon forever, and you had to think it was pretty crazy, I would think, when Abma wasn't on Solomon at some point. It's just like, wait, that guy has built this brand for 20 years. How the hell is he not on the program anymore? And given there's shit going on behind the scenes that I'm not even bringing up, but anybody's replaceable at any time.
Yeah, totally. And to be fair to the brands, I think I've never seen too many brands do like these like ludicrous things. But you know, you have what just happened with Eddie Bauer, where they let the whole team go for the influencers. Like,
so crazy.
But it's brand direction, you know? It's like you get in a different guy that thinks that this is the way that it's going, which I agree is totally crazy and probably won't work out well, but that's their choice, you know? So overall, like, I'd say that the ski industry is like surprisingly stable, which not too many people would probably say, but going through a bunch of recessions now and like watching the tech sector or like people with these financially stable jobs getting laid off, like I haven't seen a ton of that in the ski industry, you know, and we're very adaptable, you know, you're like, okay, well, you're taking away this budget. Well, I need to like get this sponsor on board. And, you know, it's like a lot of ebbs and flows, you know, when one is down, the other one's up, which I think is probably a pro for working with different companies.
Well, I feel like the consistency in the ski industry is because when you don't pay the employees shit and you don't pay the athletes shit, it's pretty easy to keep costs down. And it feels like that's across the board. Yes, some people do well, but for the most part, everybody could be doing better, I feel like. But that's just my personal opinion and what do I know. But we're going to go back to your beginnings, or not totally your beginnings, but you were in Cranmore for a while. Then you moved to Revelstoke, but Revelstoke isn't even a resort yet. What was the draw of that place when it didn't have an infrastructure?
I moved to Revelstoke the year before. Well, basically, they announced it the year that I moved there, but that was like unbeknownst to me.
So you just went there for this undeveloped wonderland of nature, and they're like, hey, we're going to build Disneyland here next year too.
Oh, it was crazy. Like, so, I mean, the real reason why I moved was there was a group of friends from the Bow Valley that came out here and went snowmobile skiing, and there was this run that they did called Heli Run. It was one of the CMH Heli runs. And at the time, it was like super dialed. It's like a 3,000-foot run. The record on it's like 15 runs, and you can take like a groom trail up. We'd be towing, and it was like the real deal. And it was like powder, pillows, coming from the Rockies. It was heaven, total heaven. Never seen anything like it. Best run of my life. And, you know, I did it once before and came out with Eric. We both bought snowmobiles and tried to learn how to snowmobile and totally failed. But the other reason, like almost the biggest reason, was at the time, if you wanted to be a professional skier, you needed a certain amount of face time in Whistler.
For sure.
That was the gig. Like if you stuck it out in your own hometown, you just weren't relevant, really. You know, we didn't have social media. Like we didn't have any of that. Like you needed to go and present yourself there, FaceTime, like opportunities. And so Canmore was like 12 hours from Whistler and Revy was like 6. So I wasn't prepared to move to Whistler, but it was a good like stepping stone for me.
Was just Whistler too much? It was just like too Hollywood of the ski industry and you didn't want to live that all the time?
Yeah, I mean, that's the gist of it. I mean, growing up in the Rockies, we were like kind of like bred to hate Whistler a little bit.
They're the Vale of Canada, which I guess they are.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it was just like never my scene. I was never like big on the big scene or whatever. And then moved to Revy for the snow. That was the other part of growing up in the Rockies is we would do the professional skiing thing, like jumping off cliffs and skiing lines. But I remember like pretty early on, like Eric jumped off a pretty big cliff and landed on a rock and had a huge hematoma in his ass. And I think it was a pretty big wake-up call for all of us. I was like, man, if this is what we want to do, like we need to go to a place that has a bit more snow. And yeah, the interior, Revelstoke and Whistler had all that, you know?
Yeah.
There's a huge reason why Whistler is so popular. It's an amazing place for all that stuff.
Yeah, I love that place, but I can see where it does have that Hollywood element to it. I mean, you go to that one chair where you're looking up at Air Jordan and every single person there is just waiting for people to hit it. And like all the pro skiers, if it's the right day, it's the day for them to get their ego stroked. And it's pretty fucking awesome unless you don't need your ego stroked, I feel like.
Yeah, for sure.
It's time for my final round of sponsors, and I'm going to start things off with Best Day Brewing. Over the years, sure, I've enjoyed drinking beer, maybe a little too much sometimes. I mean, once it hits your lips, it tastes so good. But these days, I have so much to do, and I need a beer that doesn't slow me down. That's where Best Day comes into my life. While I still drink alcoholic beer, I'm finding that most days, I just want the IPA flavor and not the alcohol. And with Best Day, I found that their hazy IPA and their Kolsch have just as much, if not more, flavor than the alcoholic versions. And I've done blind taste tests on my friends. None of them knew the difference when I handed them a pint of Best Day. And after we had 3 or 4 beers at my taste test, all my friends were psyched when I let them know that they weren't consuming alcohol and everyone could drive home. While I'm not asking you to quit drinking, I know that most of us would be better off slowing down, and Best Day is the perfect choice for doing that. So next time you're at the store, please pick up a 6-pack of Best Day and support the beer that supports me. And if you can't find Best Day at your local grocer, head on over to bestday.com and orders over $50 get free shipping. My final sponsor is a brand that you should pour your Best Day brewing in. I'm talking about Stanley, another iconic Seattle brand that has been ahead of the curve since 1913. While we all know Stanley for creating that iconic green bottle that kept your grandpa's coffee hot all day long, they still do that and a lot more these days. They're still all about adventure. They're still all about keeping your beverages hotter or colder than any other product ever created. And I know this because I've been given just about every water bottle on the planet, and nothing comes close to what I found in Stanley. And Stanley has always been the right choice when it comes to the planet. If you're still using single-use plastics for your beverages, it's time to make a change, and I'm making it easier than ever to do that. You're going to save 30% on all your Stanley products when you head on over to stanley1913.com and go shopping. I highly recommend picking up a water bottle and a set of pint glasses. When you check out, enter the code DRINKFAST, that's all lowercase, all one word, and you're going to save 30%, and that's the best deal you're going to find anywhere on Stanley products. So those are my sponsors. Now let's get back into the podcast. One thing about Revelstoke is eventually it gets built out and it's this huge, ginormous resort. Does it eventually price the locals out, and do people get frustrated and angry with like all the money coming in?
Yeah, I mean, we've gone through all that for sure. And we continue to go through that with COVID, like everywhere in the world that happened with COVID. You know, a lot of the locals, like the true locals, they were quite happy here logging or working for the railway, and they just saw their property taxes go like crazy. It was pretty interesting. So like in the heyday, right at the start, there was like crazy hype. The like real estate went through the roof, and then the 2008 recession hit, and it hit Revy hard. Like the original owners kind of had to get bailed out and all that stuff. And prices went way back to normal, and kind of gave the community a chance to like get more centered, I think, and realize what was actually happening here with the development. But then in the last like 5 to 8 years, it's just gone like fully crazy. And then COVID went totally crazy. So when I first moved here, all the kids, as soon as they graduated high school, they wanted to leave. And now I joke, it's like, now the kids can't afford to live here.
Yeah.
So, you know, like with anything, it has its problems, but I think it has a very strong sense of community here. So if you want to be here, you can totally make it happen.
It's just rare that you see a community go from nothing to Disney World in such a short period of time, and see people who are able to live comfortably to getting priced out happen in just like a decade. It's crazy.
Yeah. I mean, the first year's like shoulder season, like people joke about the shoulder season, like you'd walk into a restaurant, you'd be the only one in there. Like right. It wasn't like a shoulder season. It was like a ghost town. And, you know, like I am for sure biased. Like I think the ski hill has done amazing things for this community. You know, the climbing's gotten better. The mountain biking's gotten better. We have all these like new businesses and stuff like that. But for sure, it has its problems. There's pros and cons to every decision.
Yeah, and I only pull out the bad side for this podcast, so sorry about that. But I guess when I become familiar with your name, I think was through an incredible set of photos. It could have been through an MSP movie before, but I think it was through this Rubens crab trip to shoot the Eclipse. And when that came out, it like won a Powder Award for Photo of the Year. I'm sure it won a ton of other awards. I'm sure millions upon millions of eyes were on these Eclipse photos because it was so insane and beautiful. But I'm guessing it wasn't an easy thing to capture. What's the backstory on that whole shoot? Was it a total scramble to make the shot happen?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny, like as you get older, you go on these trips and they never felt like totally crazy at the time because you're kind of in it. And you're talking about these trips, like the lead up is months in advance. And so by the time you get there, you've been in it and living it for so long that it kind of like somewhat seems normal. But then years back when you like look on these trips, you're like, wow, that was fucking crazy. Like, I can't believe all the things we did. But basically it was Krabby's idea, and this eclipse was happening over snow, which I can't remember the exact stat, but it was never going to happen again for like another 100 years or something like that, like a crazy amount of years. The catch was the best place to do it was in Svalbard, which is in the middle of nowhere, like the actual middle of nowhere, like north of Norway there. And it was in the middle of March, which is like just coming out of their like deep winter, like when we first got there, the days were super short and we like watched them get longer and longer through like a 3-week trip. But yeah, we had this like crazy trip where we snowmobiled down even further into the middle of nowhere on the island there. And it was fucking cold the whole time. And if you do like a spring camping trip, you might have a cold night. And the kind of blessing is always that it warms up during the day and you get your body temperature up. I mean, I think it wasn't below -20 the entire time. Like it never warmed up. The sun was so low in the horizon, it never warmed up. And then we're in the middle of polar bear country. Like not only are you winter camping, like the crappiest part of winter camping, if anyone's done it a lot, is getting in and out of your sleeping bag. So we added a whole nother one to that because you had to do an hour each night of polar bear watch. But yeah, it turned into this like pretty incredible trip.
But you guys are focusing on like 3 minutes of light though, right? Like you thought about this for months ahead of time, but the eclipse and the time that you have is like you've got to be in a certain spot for not much time, right?
Yeah, and so that's where a little bit of the drama started coming out. Is I think we'd been in Svalbard for maybe 2 weeks at this point, and none of the skiers had really skied. And of course, we're all like pretty hungry to go skiing. You get a bit antsy, and we're basically focused. Rubens got his compass out. He has it all figured out in his brain of like the exact place that he needs to see the eclipse to get the skier behind the eclipse. And so you have to like work out where the sun's going to be at the time. And we finally settled on this one ridge, which we thought we could work. And then they really had to figure out where they needed to be. But then, of course, that day, it was like blowing and like -25 or something like that, freezing cold, hiking in your puffies and trying to get this eclipse shot. And basically, the shot that you see, it's this ridge, and the three of us, Cody Townsend, Brody 11, and myself, just hiked up and down that thing as many times as we could during the eclipse. And then the crazy part is like when we had like the total eclipse, like you actually couldn't do anything. Like it was this crazy primal light that I've like never seen before. Like everybody was just like screaming and shouting, and there was like no skiing going on. It was really those shots like before and after where we got it. But yeah, it was a pretty wild experience overall. I mean, the whole thing though, that's crazy. And to Solomon's credit here is like Ruben had this idea, like all you needed is one friggin' cloud in the sky and you would have gotten nothing, and the whole trip would have been kind of like a flop.
And this is probably like a $70,000 trip at least to get everybody in the right place and all that stuff.
Oh, at least probably more. I mean, it was a big production there. I mean, let's just say this, we had Solomon TV at the time. You would have like little short ones, but this was the big project of the year, like this is like, we're putting a lot of money into this one. And if it doesn't work out, well, who knows, and it totally worked out. But that's the gamble every time. This just felt like a bit bigger of a gamble than usual.
Did you know, like, you guys are freaking out when you see that light that you've never seen before? You're screaming, and I'm sure you guys are just blown away with the beauty of what nature is doing right there. But when you see those photos, do you know you've captured gold?
I don't know, to be honest. I feel like that was one of those trips that really sinks in after the fact. I think we are like all kind of just relieved that it happened and that we got it. And there'd been a bit of tension, like I was saying, not getting to ski stuff. And I think the skiers were pretty stoked. We can like all take a breath and go ski some crazy terrain because there was this insane terrain around there, So I think it was really one of those things that like it was, a bit of a slow burn. And to be honest, more than the photo, the thing I remember about that was like the total eclipse and the crazy light. And it was just like total primal, like you were screaming and you didn't even know you were screaming. You could totally see why the Mayans had those crazy ceremonies for that stuff. Yeah, it was pretty cool.
And you had mentioned something about the cold on that trip and being brutally cold, -20 the whole time. It doesn't warm up. But cold is something that's been a battle, I feel like, for you for maybe not your whole career, but a lot of your later career. It's like cold almost ended your career, I feel like. And you don't hear many skiers talk about getting cold feet and that being a big thing. But for you, it was.
I wouldn't say that trip helped out with the cold feet side of it. Like I definitely got a decent chunk of frostbite on the toes on that trip.
That's the start. And then every year it gets worse the more frostbite you get on the toes, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, like realistically, it started in ski racing.
Plug boots?
Yeah, your plug boots, they get colder. I mean, at least with ski racing, you could go inside or whatever. But yeah, the Svalbard trip was definitely very, very cold trip. And then after that, I didn't really realize the damage that I'd done. You know, you're young and you kind of shrug it off and you're like, oh, it's just my feet or whatever. But I guess it would be maybe 6 years back now. I was just having these huge problems every year. By the time I'd get to January, my feet were so sore from being cold that by the time I got to January, I was only like kind of skiing when I had to, which sucked for me. Like, you know, I love the film skiing side of it, but I need the like skiing for me to like feed my soul. And so I wasn't able to do that. And it was a total bummer. And then I guess it'll be 3-4 years ago now, I found those lens heated socks. Like, don't get a penny from them, but like I bought them outright and they've totally saved my feet. And today now I've actually brought them back. But it was a pretty weird couple of years there, dealing with the cold and swollen feet, and foot pain is like the one thing that I've seen numerous grown men cry about. So it's not a laughing matter, but yeah, I'm sure happy that I like figured that side of it out.
I mean, did you think that it could end your pro ski career? I mean, are you almost at the point like I've got to call my sponsors and tell them I just can't do this trip because my feet are cold?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely, it was not going in a good direction. Let's say that. Like, every year was getting worse, and it takes the fun out of it, I think, is more than anything. You look at your ski boots and you grimace and you're like, oh, I don't want to put my feet in there. Not a fun time, that's for sure.
Well, I wear heated socks as well, and heated gloves, and anything heated I will pay for because I really don't like being cold at all. But for you, you shouldn't pay for them. You should have gone to them and told them that they saved your ski career and that you guys are going to sell a shit ton of socks together because you're a marketing vehicle to sell stocks and you have a story to sell socks. But that didn't happen because you're too nice of a Canadian and you didn't really push for that. And that's totally okay. But I feel like the coming out party for you for the entire world is in 2006, you start filming with MSP. And how does that whole deal come together? Is it Hoji that makes that happen, or is it Solomon that's paying the first year? How do you get your foot in the door there?
Yeah, so it was definitely Hoji and one of the filmers that Hoji got in with Dustin Lindgren, and they kind of vouched for me. And obviously Solomon had a big part of that too. Like, they sponsored the movie, and that's how that whole gig works. But that was the year that moved to Revi, bought snowmobiles, and tried the snowmobile thing out. I mean, the stories of Hoji and I trying to learn how to snowmobile are pretty endless. We definitely did not buy the most reliable snowmobiles off the bat, and mine was broken a lot of the time. And the first Matchstick trip was a Braylorn trip. I mean, there's so many stories from this trip of total flailing on snowmobiles, but it was with Abma and Hugo and out in Braylorn, and you know, those guys just like took off. And by this point, my sled had blown up, and Hoji and I are tandeming on his, and they just take off, and we flip our sled like probably 10 times before we get to the zone, and they're like totally ruined and exhausted by the time we got there. They've already skied like 2 or 3 lines, and they're like, okay, like, let's get you up there and blah, blah, blah. And we're like, holy shit. Yeah, okay, like, let's go. And get up there, and they tandem us up there, and then Hoji sees a line and across the valley. He's like, I want to go ski that. And promptly like drives his snowmobile down to the valley and stuffs it in a creek and just starts hiking up a line. He was just done with it. Hugo's beside him, like snowmobiling like halfway up, and luckily they catch each other. But yeah, that was the start. And I mean, to some degree, that was like the start of snowmobile filming, when the rest of it was like you were in a helicopter and you needed big budget. So we were spending lots of money, but it wasn't like the crazy amount that you spend on heli skiing. So that was like the in for me. So the snowmobile thing was like a big deal at the time.
You guys were like 5 years behind all the Whistler guys. Like Zox and all those dudes bought sleds in like 2002. And they were like, we have so many zones out here. It's going to be incredible. And Abma and all those dudes learned how to ride early on. So it's got to be embarrassing when you go back there with Abma and them that whole first year.
Oh, yeah. Like, we were so green. We had no idea. I mean, the very first day that we went out to try and shoot in a zone called the Callahan. And then our buddy Dusty there, who was the filmer, who also had a sled, like, we go across the lake and start up in the trees, and his sled just stops. And we're like, we have no idea what to do. We're like, okay, poke around. And luckily Blake Jorgensen was with us. And this time, like, all the who's of skiing is passing as like Zox and Treadway, and they're just like, don't stop and like keep going. And Eventually, we can't get the sled started. We're like, okay, well, we got to tow it out. Have no idea how to take the belt off, like cut the belt off. And then we have to tow it across the lake. The lake's not frozen, so they keep getting stuck in the slush. Like, just turns into this horrible ordeal. It takes literally all day. Finally get it back, and we're down in the parking garage. I'm like, Dusty, like, you sure you put gas in this thing? He's like, yeah, I checked the nozzle, or checked the like little thing. And they were so unreliable at the time. And turns out he had no gas in it. I look back on it now, I hear people complaining about getting into snowmobiling. It's like, yeah, you guys have no idea of like those old sleds, you flip them over, they get flooded, and it was a character building. Let's go with that.
So that first year, you're definitely the new guy when it comes to snowmobiling, and you're a deer in the headlights there. How about the whole filming game? Do you figure that out pretty quickly?
Definitely did not figure out the ropes very early. Did the classic, like, you see this all the time, the young, hungry kid coming into filming and wants to go jump off the biggest thing, ski the gnarliest line, and then just crashes all the time.
Right.
Did a lot of that, lining up things that's what you did. This is your chance. You put all the pressure on yourself and you wanted to go ski the gnarliest stuff, and you kind of teed up stuff that didn't really go, or you just didn't look it close enough. And like, if you'd landed it, sure, it would have been like the shot of the movie, but there wasn't a lot of chance of moving it. But that year we did that snowmobile trip, and then I was lucky enough to get myself on a heli trip out of Pemberton, which was like very affordable in the grand scheme of heli trips. And that was like a whole different ball game. Like, by that point, I kind of realized, okay, like, slow it down. Like, you don't need to like go off the biggest things. Just get the shots. So the first line I picked out, I was like, okay, this is a good warm-up line. It was like down a ridge, and there was a tree that I needed to turn left at, and then off a, decent sized cliff. And scoping the tree, I'm like, oh yeah, it's like a 3-4 foot tree. Skiing down the ridge, and like, okay, well, that is the tree, but that tree's like 10 feet tall. Like, okay, I guess this cliff might be a bit bigger than I think it's gonna be, And so that first heli trip was like full crazy, like had no sense of scale, just sending it off things that probably shouldn't have been sending it off of, but a lot of it worked out, and we got super lucky with conditions too. So yeah, I guess that kind of all worked out in the end.
And back then it was all film. So I would think, like, when you line things up that were like a 20% chance of you landing, you weren't only not getting the shot, but you're also costing the company a shit ton of money because all that film had to be processed. I mean, because you came into it in the film days, right?
Well, so that's exactly it. I mean, I credit that with having a long career, is like you quite quickly learn that failing is not, or like crashing is not really the best option out there. Just the amount of money you cost. And like, it still goes to this day, even though we're on digital, it's like by the time you get a filmer out there, and if they're moving around for that shot, it's like there's a lot of moving pieces. And so like, if the best skiers out there, yes, they're pushing it, but they're being consistent as well. Of course, if you're pushing it, you're going to be crashing a little bit, but you need to have that consistency there. That's such a big part of professional skiing.
Yeah. And when that first MSP movie comes out, I think it's 7 Sunny Days, and when you go back to mom and dad and you show them your segment in the movie, does it feel like it's all come together? Like, they're, not to say they weren't proud of you before then, but when they see that all your hard work has actually paid off and you're this pro skier dude on the big screen, is it like a super proud moment where like you get all the feels?
Yeah, I would say in those days, because like you really didn't get to see anything beforehand. There was no social media. There's no like clips. We would film the entire winter and you really wouldn't see much. And so like there was a couple times where we'd go down to Crested Butte and help out with some editing or whatever. But like a lot of the times, the world premiere, which used to happen in Whistler, that was the first time you got to see your whole movie. You didn't have any idea how long your segment was. You hadn't seen anybody else's. I remember those movie premieres, and you were just like, the anticipation was crazy because you hadn't seen anything. Like you hadn't seen what Adam had been doing, like other than like what you'd seen. Yeah, and then taking it home to the parents, like, I mean, I think they're classic parents. Like, they were just happy to see that I was like healthy and alive, That was like their main concern.
Do they worry about you at all in the mountains? Like, is there fear? Is it general stoke in your parents?
They're not like overly worried, but I think you'd kind of not be human to not be worried about your son doing something like that. I mean, my parents are definitely a little bit old school British. Like, they really wanted me to go to university, and they thought that's the path to success in our society. I think they literally thought I was going to be washing toilets if I didn't go to university. So it was definitely like a slow burn to convince them that like there was like other ways to operate in the world. And to be fair, like during my time alive, I think that's like been proven more and more is that like school education is not necessarily as important as it used to be.
No, I think if you follow your passion, it's more important than school education. As long as you're really 100% behind your passion, you're going to make good things happen out of it.
Yeah, totally. And I think like that was, definitely the time when they started realizing it. And to be fair, like, when I'm getting into Matchstick, like I'm not making any money. Like I'm still like working all summer to pay to be a pro skier. Like it definitely was not paying for itself at that point. So from a parent perspective, I'm not really sure. I'd have to ask them, but
yeah, it's kind of like, oh, that's cute, but can you buy dinner tonight?
Yeah. Like even then they didn't really see it as like a viable way to make a living.
Well, a viable way to have an awesome time is not only filming for a ski movie, is going on the tour and promoting it afterwards. Did you get to go on those movie tours once the movie came out?
Oh yeah, definitely did a fair share of the old Matchstick tours. Well, and other tours. Yeah, I think they probably took a few years off our lives, that's for sure.
Is it just pretty much crushing beers with your buddies all night and then like trying to get in trouble in that city per se?
Yeah, exactly. Like we were so young and dumb at the time. You're always doing weird things. And when you get a bunch of high energy dudes together fueled by alcohol, there's like lots of good stories. Fortunately, don't remember many of them, but I don't know if you like get it as much these days with social media because we've seen so much. I don't know if the anticipation is high, but like back in the day, that was when you would watch the movie and it would get you so stoked for skiing, and you'd be like trying to figure out all the music and like downloading that onto your mini disc player and all that stuff. So, there was so much excitement behind it.
Awesome, man. Well, at this point, we've been going for like an hour and 8 minutes right now, and I've got at least another hour and 8 minutes to go. And with the way that I do podcasts, it's tough for me to do 2.5 hours in a straight shot. I think it'd probably be tough for you to do 2.5 hours in a straight shot, although people do it all the time. So what I want to ask you is, in the next few days, do you have another hour to record another podcast with me?
Yeah, definitely. Schedule's a little up in the air right now, but I will keep you in the loop. But yeah, definitely in the next few days here, we'll have time to figure out that time for sure.
Perfect. Well, you're not off the hook yet because I end every show with something that I call inappropriate questions. And I get someone that to ask 3 questions, and they can be anything. And I was able to get a guy who I thought we had already talked about in this podcast, but we haven't talked about him yet. He is like the mastermind behind Solomon Free Ski TV, which has turned into Solomon TV. And we can call him this great movie producer and director and all that stuff because he creates incredible content. But he's also the godfather of new school skiing and an absolute badass in Mike Douglas. And Mike Douglas came up with 3 questions. Are you ready for question number 1?
Yes, I think so.
All right, here we go.
Question number 1 is, it's a long way between being a professional skier, globetrotting around the world, to becoming an organic farmer. And I want to know, what was the straw that broke the camel's back in making that transition? Where did the real shame spiral start?
All right. I think he wants to point the finger at himself.
Yeah. No, I think he does want to point the finger at himself. I won't dive too deep into that because I think we can talk about it in the next portion.
For sure.
But yeah, it definitely started 2016 with Guilt Trip and kind of my climate journey. But more so, it definitely happened with my partner, Jessie. That's definitely like her dream and became my dream. And then when COVID hit, we've been talking about a farm. We've been looking for a farm, and COVID hit. And, those first couple of weeks of COVID, there was like definitely a lot of uncertainty of like where the world was going to go. And
doomsday.
Both of our first thoughts was like, why are we not farming? Like, we've been talking about this for a super long time. And with that, we dived in deep, and now we're about to go into year 4, and it's super crazy. It's really fun. All the reasons why I love the mountains are the same about farming. You have to be kind of in tune with nature. You know when to push, when to pull back, and you're just like totally dictated on what nature's doing. So it's super fun. You never stop learning.
And we have to make this inappropriate somehow. And you brought up your partner. And how long have you been sleeping with Greg Hill's sister?
Yeah, there you go. 5 years. So actually, in the height of the climate change, like working on curbing my carbon footprint, I was hanging out with Greg a lot. And so the joke goes, I couldn't sleep with Greg, so I found his sister.
All right. Well, you could sleep with Greg, but you chose not to.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. We're going to go to question number 2.
Chris, you were responsible, I guess, for a lot of the traditions that we did as the Solomon team in our annual meetups, Mountain Collective. And one of those traditions was borderline inappropriate. It involved some water and a small French town. Can you tell us what that tradition was and any ridiculous stories from that tradition?
So first, I should call out that you're like the good times guy. While we've been pretty serious in this podcast and it hasn't been all laughy, like this is what's going on in your life, we're telling your story. But you're the guy who puts smiles on people's faces. You're always having a good time and you make every trip more fun. And I think Mike's alluding to that by saying that you're the ringleader of everything at these Solomon meetings when you're at Solomon, but they lost that because you're not there anymore, which we'll talk about next week. But tell us what Mike's talking about of this small town, water, and this tradition that you guys had.
Yeah, this is great. So some years we'd travel over to Annecy, France. That's where Solomon's based. We'd go there 4 times a year. But then we started doing this Mountain Collective over there where the whole team comes over and, back to like a bunch of young athletes getting together. There's a lot of energy and normally fueled by some booze. And by the end of the trip, we'd have this awesome trip of designing and skiing together, and it was super fun. And last night before everyone flew out, we'd be in Annecy. It's like the most picturesque city in the world. It's so beautiful. These old buildings with these beautiful canals running through it with like the absolute clearest water in the world. And to be honest, I don't know totally how it started. I mean, it was definitely one very late night. And I think it was Greg and I that started together. And we decided to go skinny dipping in the middle of town with people all around. And, the next time we had like everybody in town, we're like, we got to go. It's tradition. And yeah, it started a tradition, the height of it. I think, had 15, 20 of the world's top skiers skinny dipping in the middle of Annecy with people all around. And yeah, people taking photos. I'm actually quite surprised we haven't ended up on the paper yet, but there's still time.
That's amazing. And I would think when you get that many people together, there's pranks that are going on left and right. What's the grossest or weirdest thing that ended up in a ski boot?
I mean, in my opinion, it would be like the booze,
Shoot
when
the boot?
you're like you're shoeing and whatever. That's never been my thing. I've always thought it's disgusting.
Yeah, it is disgusting.
But another good like Mountain Collective time, we were at Sushi Village in Whistler there. And I got up and was very intoxicated at the time and was making a speech that, was kind of borderline. People thought, we were like, oh, he's going to get kicked off the team, but I brought it back to some love. But I'm still in my ski boots and I'm still in my ski pants because I've had a hard après session. Little do I know that I think it was Cody or one of the French guys was just filling my side vents with sushi. So I definitely woke up in the morning with a lot of sushi everywhere.
Oh, man, that's amazing. That's great. Let's jump into his final inappropriate question.
Chris, you seem to have a couple of notable man crushes throughout your life, and I want to know who you love more, Greg Hill or Eric Hjorleifson?
Shit, that's a good one. I mean, Greg Hill's pretty much my brother-in-law at this point. Not that there's a ring on our fingers. I mean, I gotta choose Eric because he's a very, very old friend, and he's one of those guys that, I won't talk to him for months and we can just like pick up right where we left off, and the pure nostalgia of it. But I feel like I've been super fortunate. Like I have a lot of man crushes in my life, people that I really look up to and call super good friends and get to go skiing with them. It's a special place, the old ski industry.
It sure is. And that is part 1 of the podcast. It's Inappropriate Questions. And we will reconvene in a few days and we'll record part 2. I would give a long summary of what I think about your life and times and how awesome you are, but there's no reason to do that because we're going to do part 2 and I'll do that at the end of that one. So for now, I want to thank you for your time and we will talk soon.
Awesome. Thanks, buddy. Appreciate it.
So that was part 1 with Chris Rubens, and I hope you leave the show with the same feelings I have about Chris. What a great, passionate guy he is. And that's just part 1. The stories in part 2 will be even better, and I won't spoil any of them for you. What I will do is read you the review of the week. It's a 5-star review that comes from J. Smithworks. The title is Thank You for a Great Podcast. And here's the review. Mike, thank you for a great podcast. I stumbled across your podcast recently and have been catching up on past episodes. Each episode is inspiring in its own way, and each guest brings their own stories, which you find a way of bringing to life in intricate detail with your thoughts and meticulous research. Thank you for a great podcast, and I look forward to new episodes, new stories, and new inspiration. Thank you very much, Jay Smithworks, for that review. Please email me at mike@thepowellmovement.com with your address. You're going to get that limited edition custom puffin drinkware for your beer or your NA beer. Preferably, it's a product from Best Day Brewing. And I really thank you for that review. I really do put so much into the research that I put into this podcast. And I'm glad that you noticed that. And it's one thing that I take great pride in. So thank you for calling that out. I thank you for these reviews. I thank you for listening. And finally, please support the amazing sponsors that make this show happen. Because without these brands, I wouldn't be able to do this. I would actually have to get a job to support my family because my wife can't do it alone, although she's got a badass job and she's a badass in her own right. Maybe she could do it alone. But she wouldn't let me be a stay-at-home dad, and I don't think I'd want to be one. But please support my amazing sponsors so I don't have to get a job. And they are Elan Skis, Rollerblade, Peter Glenn Ski and Sports, Best Day Brewing, and Stanley. Have a great week, everyone.